Hello, welcome to Thursdays on the Stoop. I'm Julian Schendelman, and today we have main character syndrome, owning our flawed selves in memoir with Erica Vanstone. Erica is an author, poet, and executive director living in Philadelphia. Her debut memoirella, Don't Let Them Eat the Baby, Why Roller Derby is the Greatest Sport Never Sold, publishes October 14th, 2025 from Portland, Oregon's indie house Banana Pitch Press. So excited to have you here today. Erica, take it away.
Oh my goodness, thank you. And what Julian told me right before this was that my pub date is his birthday. And I'm just going to take a second to share my presentation with you friends. And I'm going to do the full screen. All right, fantastic. Thank you all for coming. I'm so excited to see so many people I know. It's really great to be here. And one of the things that I was talking to Julian about, Warren actually recommended that I apply for this because he knew that I had a book coming out, and I think I've learned so much in the process of putting together this memoir called Don't Let Them Eat the Baby, Why Roller Derby is the Greatest Sport Never Sold. And I actually have a copy of the book here, if you can see it, where I'm holding it up. I know I have the blur function on, very fun. But this process actually took me 2 years to write. And so some of my key learnings that I'm putting together for you include process conversations. And the story of this memoir is about me, almost like an emotional coming of age, but also growing with the sport of roller derby. I was the executive director for 4 years of the Women's Flat Track Derby Association, which is the governing body for the sport of roller derby. And the experiences that I had, while exciting, I think were also really tumultuous. So when I was thinking about what it was that I had to say or what I wanted to even pass along in my knowledge was, I think there's a conception that if you are putting together a memoir, that you're either a famous person or that you have, something really beautiful or meaningful or something that puts you in this place of virtue to share. And I like to think of myself as a very complex person who is both good and bad. And I think the journey of trying to put yourself down on the page is also a very exciting, sometimes painful journey of exploring who you are really as a person, right? Because you have to get really comfortable with your flaws along with all of the things that you think make yourself worth reading, right? Because that's why you're putting this down on paper. So, that's me, and that's me with roller skates on my feet. And yes, I did skate for 10 years. Um, to talk a little bit about main character in memoir. So, memoir as a genre, first, a few things. I wanted to know if anybody is actively working on a project right now. And if you are working on a project right now, can you put that in the chat? And I'm just going to take a look. Okay, I want to make sure I have all of the things open. So if you're working on a project right now that is memoir related, okay, fantastic. Let me know. Oh, awesome. This sounds great. If you're thinking about writing a memoir, it's okay to put that in the chat as well. So I think the thing to know is that regardless of whether it is specifically memoir or whether you're exploring sort of how to develop the main character, it's the same conversation, really, right? A main character in any genre is the primary perspective or POV of your piece of writing, right? Um, the main character is also very much a guide through the emotional landscape of your book. And I think what's exciting is that you have the ability to make that guide either reliable or unreliable, trustworthy or untrustworthy. And I think these are all things that we typically will think about. Yeah, hybrid memoir also. Yeah, this is exciting. Everybody's got good projects. Um, it's going to be the same conversation that you have, right? Like you are trying to think about how you're structuring your main character. Um, for memoir in particular, the journey for me writing this book started with a really simple question. Somebody asked me, how come roller derby isn't a more popular sport? And my head kind of exploded, and I was like, well, let me tell you why. And so, in thinking about how to structure the book, I knew that I wanted it to be my story. I knew that I wanted it to be nonfiction. But I think the thing that was the biggest mystery to me is how to write myself as a character. So, how do you take how do you take the writer and turn them into the main character? And in doing that, really, what I did is the same thing that anyone does when they put together a story of any kind that has a lead character. Can you actually give me, as a show of hands, how many folks have, and I want to understand sort of the level of everybody's where you're at in your writing journey. Can you tell me if you've written a piece of fiction that is greater than 5,000 words? Yeah, I was going to say you can either do the little raise hand, put it in the chat. Okay, awesome. Okay, so a mixture. Yeah, so then I'm going to ask, I ask specifically fiction because I think most people, when they're thinking about a main character, are really thinking about placing that person in a work of fiction. Anyone here written a nonfiction or memoir piece that is longer than 5,000 words? All right, cool. Yeah, awesome. So I think in approaching myself as a main character for my memoir, really what I did is kind of the same thing that I would do for any other piece of fiction writing, which is why I asked about fiction, because I think we typically think of POV in terms of how the main character guides you through that story. Oh, this is exciting. Everybody has a really diverse amount of experiences. So what I'm going to ask you to do is take your pen and paper, or if you have a Google Doc open, that's also totally fine. And I'm going to have folks tell me what you think are four-ish things that you think are different between what a narrative main character might be, a fiction main character, and a memoir or nonfiction main character. And I'm going to give you probably 2 minutes, and then you're going to share. All right. Do folks have answers? And does anyone want to start with some of the things that they chose? You can either raise your hand or you can come off mute. It's totally fine. Jill, do you want to talk?
Sure. I came up with only one, which is closer allegiance to the truth as perceived by the narrator.
Yeah, I was going to ask you whose truth?
The narrators. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Sabina says, oh wait, sorry. Before that, we have somebody, I'm going to open the chat. All right, cool. Grounding in truth. It's so interesting to me, the concept of truth, right? And I think perceived, narrator's truth, these are things that I think are lived experiences that will come out as you develop your memoir main character. Let me take a look. Sorry, I'm gonna open up the chat a little bigger. Here we go. Memoir narrator has hindsight, and memoir narrator cannot choose who they are in relation to the story. Somewhat. I was going to say somewhat they can. Susan, you have your hand raised?
Hi.
Hi.
So I would say, and this is not just character, but this is, I would say the world of the character exists.
Yeah.
Whereas you get to invent a world for fiction, and the character, and then it's kind of a downside because conversely, the fictional character, you can make them as evil or as virtuous as you want them to be. And it's very fraught when you're writing about yourself. I've found like the things that I went through that were tough, you know, am I trying to do a cause and effect? Am I trying to do am I trying to justify it? Am I, you know, am I being honest with what's going on? So I think a fictional character is easier, and possibly a fictional world might be easier if you got enough imagination, because you do have to be, it has to exist. Well, I'm thinking about the Carmen Machado, the dollhouse, which is not a real world. You know what memoir I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Totally.
I never got her name quite right, but yeah, but in general, you're trying to write about a world that exists that other people will have very strong opinions about, I would think.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I wanted to just sort of clarify, the narrator cannot choose who they are in relation to the story, but they can perhaps choose how they're relating their relation to the story, which I think is where the creativity comes in. And then we also have perceived truth. Oh, thanks, Sylvia. Perceived truth and authentic voice. So there are two words I think that have come up in this conversation that I really want to explore for a second. One of them is truth, and then one of them is authenticity. In writing my memoir, I think all I really had was my story, right? Like all I really had was my perceived experience of an event or a series of events. So in some ways, there is an aspect of what I perceive to be the truth around it. But I think the key in my mind is authenticity, because um, regardless of whether or not there is sort of factualness to it, I think authenticity is kind of the sweet spot that you really want to strive for, specifically in memoir, because authenticity doesn't necessarily mean likable. Authenticity doesn't necessarily mean good and or virtuous. And I think virtuous is a word that I will also discuss a little bit more as we go. Um, there are a number of things wrapped into the concept of virtue that we can talk about and pick apart. But I think truth, authenticity, those are places that we should explore in this conversation, because they're going to bring you the closest, I think, to the main character that you're looking to unravel as a memoir writer. So thanks, everybody. Did anybody have anything else that you wanted to share that you came up with that you think are different between narrative and memoir? And I'll just expand the window just to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, cool. All right, great. All right. So in terms of putting the main character together, I think another thing that I really want us to think about is, who are you? And I kind of touched on it a little bit. I'm going to actually exit out of this to see if I can see everybody. Hold on. I got to get my windows together. All right. I think it's important to understand that the likability factor is actually pretty critical in my mind. Authenticity over likability, I think, is in my opinion, where I'd like to recommend people strive for. So I think in order to think about writing, I guess, a better you, what I'm looking to kind of uncover is the environment around you first, right? So when we are building an authentic character, when we're trying to get close to truth, it's hard when you're the writer and the POV because a lot of it lives inside your head. Oh, yeah. And Erica, that's a good point. Frankly, after so many years, I'm not sure what truly occurred and what I remember that is slightly different than the truth. That's an important factor that we should explore in a second as well, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about sort of the mise en scène and the world that we set up for our main character. So in thinking about who we are as a main character, there's the stuff, there's the things we do, who we are, our mannerisms, our way of speaking, our method of speech, our way of relating, the physical tics that we have when we're around people who make us nervous. There are all these physical attributes to who we are as a main character that don't necessarily always organically come out, but as the writer, it's our job to make sure that we're adequately explaining ourselves. So one way that we can remind ourselves that we're building a character along with explaining our story is that we're thinking pretty critically about the places that we're experiencing in this story. We're thinking about the sights, the sounds, the smells. We're thinking about the locations. We're thinking about the time of day. We're thinking about the temperature, the sky, all of these things in terms of where our characters are interacting, because there are those little details that don't necessarily talk about the things that you and I experience in our brain every day. But, we know for a fact that when we're on the L, we look and see our reflection and realize that, we always wear our scarf tied in this certain way. So there are these details with who we are as a person that if we're able to kind of document them, then it's possible to create a richer character experience. So those things include, where do you live, work, or travel, right? People, who do you know or love? And it doesn't necessarily have to always be the other characters in the book. It can be sort of worlds within worlds. You can have pets. You can have bosses. You can have mechanics. You can have bus drivers, right? Who are the other people around us that explain further who we are? There are a lot of real, obviously, if we're talking about memoir, these are ostensibly real people, right? To use a Mr. Rogers quote, who are the people in your neighborhood, right? I think there's a lot of value to exploring the world in which your main character is operating as a way to inform the reader about who you are. And we'll talk a little bit about how all of these things kind of factor into the fabric of the story. And then environment. What is the environment and how does it respond? So for example, my book is set in the community of roller derby. So by making sure that I have done everything I can to explain what that environment is like, to talk about the people who are involved, what they're wearing, how they speak to me, how they address other people, where we're playing roller derby, how we're playing roller derby, the fact that, there are bruises, there's blood, right? There's all of these things, like content warning, there is blood in my book. But this is not necessarily you telling the story, but I think being able to create this mise en scène for your main character, for you to live and operate in, is going to get you closer to authenticity. And it is going to be a nice guardrail for you to make sure that your main character is operating well, aside from telling the story of what happened to you, right? So I think I want to get you thinking about how you're going to explain what this world is like that your character operates in. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to the next slide? It's okay if you don't.
Are we writing them in the chat, or are we
Oh,
asking them?
you can raise your hand, write them in the chat, or just come off mute. Go ahead, Erica.
No, it's a question I have is, you're talking as if we're writing about one milieu and one environment and one piece. And I'm trying to figure out which part of my whole life. I've been writing since 2012, stories from all different times in my life.
Yeah.
I'm going to be 79, and I'm trying to write everything before I forget it.
Yeah.
And I can go from when I got thrown out of the brownies for unweaving a girl's basket, all the way to stuff I've done last year. I'm like a year older than the U.S. Air Force, and I perform on stage, and I tell jokes and stuff. So I can go anytime, all along, and I don't know what part of I have stories from everywhere. I have one lines. I write by having one line, and then I write a whole story from each line.
Yeah.
And I'm overwhelmed with so many things. I don't know what to pick. I don't know what part of my life to use. And of course, the milieu has altered. I'm in Germany. I've been a shrink for the last 50 years. But I came from Greenwich Village, where I was a basket house player, comedian, stand-up comedian, and a songwriter and waitress to the stars. So, I don't know which part to pick and where. It's really driving me nuts. Because there's no one atmosphere that I've lived in. I've gone through thousands of atmospheres,
Yeah.
So what you're talking as if there's only one that we're supposed to.
Oh, no.
I mean, that you're talking about the one, I get it, but I can't do that. So how do you keep from being overwhelmed by your own life,
Yep.
That's the question.
You can. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. You can do that for every single scene you write, right? Like you can do that for every single context that you're putting yourself in as a character. But I think your question is a really important one, because what we're talking about is character arc, right? Like what we're talking about is when you are going about picking up the story that you're interested in writing about yourself. Sorry, my dog is talking in the background. When you're talking about the story that you're about to be plotting for your main character, really what we want to look at is the moments in your life, or the moments throughout that that are going to offer the greatest insight into your character changes. So that's something that we're going to talk about. Yes. So this is actually a really good segue, Erica, and this can maybe hopefully help you. So when we're thinking about, so some of the things that we're thinking about is creating a character that has a rich environment. So we know that there's some fidelity to authenticity, right? It's hard sometimes to get out of our own heads. It's hard sometimes to think about ourselves, quote unquote, objectively. So by creating these frameworks of context, by putting us in the restaurant with the stars, talking about the taste of the food, the smell of the candle wax, the, Frank Sinatra's hat, right? Like all of the things that are happening in that room, you are creating a very rich and more authentic environment for objectivity to occur, whatever that looks like for you authentically. But in terms of the overall story that you're trying to tell through your main character, really what we're going to ask you to do is to chart the change, right? So if you look back at your life and you say, well, I have 79 years to choose from, what are the key moments that stand out to you as pivotal or meaningful in some way that relates the story of you the best? And you're probably going to write a lot more of them than you're going to end up using. My recommendation for the process would be maybe something like just start writing them down, right? Like just start writing them. And then I think you're going to find yourself at a moment potentially where you have the most pivotal changes happening to your character, to you as a character. So the exercise that I wanted actually everybody to take a look at was this one. I'd like to have you think about yourself as a main character, and I'd like you to think of up to five things. And if you're not, sorry, if you're not writing memoir, that's also okay. If you have a story in mind that's fiction or nonfiction, that's also totally fine. I want you to come up with five things about the main character that change during the course of the story. So, Erica, that could for you be, I became a mother. I moved to Germany. I, you know, became an astronaut, right? Like what are the things, and I'm going to limit you to five, that change during the course of the story. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a physical change. It can be an emotional change, right? I became more confident. I learned to speak a different language. But a change that occurred, up to five of them, during the course of your story. So I'll give you a few minutes to work on that. I'll give you one more minute. All right, I'm going to start to take a couple of these from you. Before I do, I wanted to kind of share that when I first wrote when I first sat down to write the memoir, I ended up with about 85,000 words. And yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Erica. I'm presuming that you're telling a story, but it's really a series of vignettes. Ultimately, to make it an exciting memoir that people will enjoy reading, there is some authenticity, some truth some point that you're looking to get across. And so that's going to help inform which of the stories or which of the vignettes you're going to put together. When I first started writing my memoir, I had about 85,000, 90,000 words, which I think was close to 375 pages. And it was actually in the process of editing it down to a novella length that I was able to do a better job of picking these moments of change. And I had to get really brutal and sit down and say, this is essential to my change as a character. This is not. This person who is a friend of mine who I include in the book is essential to the point of the story. This other person is not. And I think that is the work that's very similar to narrative writing when you're putting together memoir, because you do really need to think critically about the things you omit just as much as you do the things you include. But to even get to that point, you might need to write way more words than you expect to have to write. You might have to write down a lot of vignettes before you get to a point where you're like, okay, I see the pattern of change in me over time. Here are the moments that got me there or not. Here are the moments that I think are most essential to my book, my story. These other things are not. So I wanted to know if folks felt comfortable sharing any of these, and I'll give you a minute. You can either raise your hand, put it in the chat, or if anyone feels moved to come off mute, that's okay too. Yeah, Erica. I like that there are so many Ericas in this session also.
I
Thumbs
know
up.
all your mothers,
Yes.
all my children fans. I was named after.
Yes, I was named after Erica Kane.
I was supposed to be Eric, a boy, and I came out wrong.
Oh
They
my
just-
gosh.
Yeah, so.
Funny. All right, so I put age, location, mental health status, occupation, and character's definition of success.
I like that. That's really powerful. That's great. Erica, other Erica,
Could you
would you?
read that? Well, could you read that again? Because I really want to take it in, and I didn't the first time, please.
Sure.
Good.
Age, location, mental health status, occupation, and the character's definition of success.
Mm.
That's excellent. Now, I want to be thoughtful and say also, those don't necessarily have to improve, right? Like this, so when we say we're charting the change, we can say, mental health status in particular, maybe the challenge, maybe the change, the arc, the turning point isn't good. Like maybe it's not that I feel better and confident, maybe that it's this is a terrible thing that happened, right? So I think there's like in exploring these changes, not all these changes have to be for the better necessarily, but they are kind of these guide points on the map to let readers know that they're not just reading a flat character, right? Like even though you experience the world in this very you-centric way all the time, you're changing constantly. And so the reader needs to understand how they follow your growth or like devolving state, right? So maybe it's not a story about growth, maybe it's a story about messing up, maybe it's a story about getting worse, maybe it's a story about being like a worse person than you were 2 years ago. You still have to be able to plot that change. Abby, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Oh, I see a hand up.
Yeah.
Abby?
My five were that I sort of was walking with my dad through his cancer journey and interviewing him about his life. Then he dies, so that's a change. I then hit rock bottom in alcoholism and drug use, and I get sober. huge news. And then I end up freezing my eggs.
I love all of this. Yeah. So, Erica A, what was the character arc that you just heard and what Abby shared? Thoughts?
Well, I think there's certain salient things in her life that she wants to write about, that there's probably a lot more, but that it's a sort of a time centered on a very tough arc of being in pain and getting through bad times and then maybe getting through it and going on. That's all I can say about it. It just seems,
Yeah.
it's a salient part of her life, and there's something that she doesn't have to wonder what she wants to write about.
I think what's exciting, yeah. I think what's exciting in what you shared, Abby, is that there's a story already there, right? Like, and you just gave us a list of 5 things that changed, and we already followed like the challenge with you, the difficulty, overcoming the difficulty, and then the choices you made out of those difficulties, right? And you didn't even tell us necessarily what all of those things were in detail, but I think framing out the story can really start as simply as plotting the moments of change that you're seeing in your character and their story. Yeah, very nicely done. Wait, someone else had their hand up. Was it Carol? Did Carol have your hand up?
Yes, and I thought
Okay.
Abby's plotting was phenomenal
Mhm.
because it went from service to despair to hope, and very quickly the movement. And she has it very definitely plotted out. So it'll be very easy to write from those 5 perspectives. Abby, I think that was a job well done. And it sounds like your life is repaired and will give others hope.
Yeah, that's awesome. Does anybody else have a couple of these you'd like? We can do maybe one more, and then I can push us further into a little more exploration. Anybody who hasn't spoken yet want to speak and share theirs? All right, everybody's very quiet today. That's okay. Like it's a Thursday afternoon. All right.
It's Thursday night.
I know.
So it's 11 at night.
That's totally fair.
I just heard about this like 5 minutes before it started. My friend Catherine wrote to me and said, you might want to do this, because everyone knows I'm writing a memoir in my group.
I'm excited that you came. This is a great group. So now that we have kind of like these points, we've got this like delightful, we've got these rich contexts that we're placing ourselves in. So we know how to describe what's happening in the world around us. We've plotted out the moments of our lives or our characters' lives that we want to talk about, or at least we've started to do that. The thing to do now is to kind of merge the two and talk about how our characters are relating in this world, how our main character, how ourselves, how we as humans are relating in this world. So like questions that I have, potentially not to single you out, Abby, but to sort of use your story as a way to kind of explain this next step. How are you making people feel as you go? So I'm imagining a situation where you are hitting rock bottom and you are, drinking a gallon of vodka a day. Who around you is experiencing the consequences of that? Have they also had to go through the challenges of losing your father as a person in their lives? Are they in a position to be able to help you out financially? are you potentially putting them in a financial challenging position? So to think about, yes, you have sort of the facts as you know them from what happened, but also trying to understand how those characters will relate to your character or relate back to you to make you a more authentic character, right? So for example, I'm in thinking of a scene to kind of pull all of this together, I'm imagining, there's probably, like, let's say there's some moment where you as a main character are waking up still drunk and you're 2 hours late to pick up your brother from the airport, and you look at your phone and there's like 20 missed messages, and you finally frantically get to him to pick him up at the airport, and he's not there and he doesn't want to, have anything to do with you again. Like, there are ways that you're experiencing there are ways that the reader is experiencing you by how people are reacting to you throughout the story, by what they're saying, by what they're not saying, by what the smells are, what the environments are. So I want you to think also about how each of these things are tension builders. Like, all of the people and things reacting to us are getting us closer to authenticity, but then also helping to build tension. Because I think we're not perfect. We're not perfect characters. And I think that that's one of the things that I was kind of trying to figure out how to navigate in my own book was, I can do a better job of telling the story about when and where I was a jerk by showing how people reacted to it, right? And by showing what people had to say and their feedback to me. Sylvia has a question. What do we do when we don't actually know how someone was impacted by our choices and say we can't ask them? Yeah, I mean, I think some of it has to do with your voice as a writer. So for example, when I wrote my memoir is actually a hybrid memoir and nonfiction. And so what I realized is one of the things I really wanted to do was to step outside of myself a little bit and to interview other people. So I took, this is actually the third rewrite of my book that is coming to publish this fall. And in order to get to that place, I actually had to write my memoir. Actually, it's the fourth. So I wrote it 3 times. And then I said, something feels like it's missing with the way that I want to tell this story. And what I actually did do is go back and interview people who were associated with it, because I did want to know how they experienced some of the same events that I did. And if they aren't available to do that, depending on how you want to write this, you can potentially imagine it. You can, obviously you don't want to fictionalize, but you can say literally, I don't know how I made this person feel. In the moment, I don't know how I make this person feel. I'm imagining they feel X, Y, and Z because of the way that they looked at me, right? So there are definitely ways that you can navigate those experiences and frameworks back to you without having to necessarily go ask a person, especially if you don't talk to them anymore. I do want to move along so we can continue. The virtuous self, right? So this is a thing that we were mentioning virtue all along. A couple of slides ago, we were mentioning the concept of virtue. Has anyone heard of the concept of the virtuous self? I hang out with a bunch of poets, and they're constantly talking about how poetry is often maligned with this idea of like, woe is me. You have no idea how hard it is being me. These terrible things always happen to me. In order to write a really compelling character, even if terrible things happen to you as a main character, you still have to be bringing us on a journey, right? You still have to find ways to express what is challenging or unlikable about you. It cannot always be the like, look how amazing I am, because there are plenty of ways that we cause pain to everybody every day in the world just simply by existing. And I think the job of a memoir writer in expressing the main character, all around, I guess, is to be able to look at yourself as objectively as possible. And the way that I want you to think about this is, what is you against the world and what is you against yourself? Right? So there's got to be those, in order to build tension, you constantly have to be thinking about it that way. Is this moment putting a woe is me lens on it? Or are there moments where and sometimes there are moments where it is going to be you against the world, right? I live in Philly, so we always think of it in terms of like Philly against the world. But I want you to think critically about that and turn it on its head a little bit and say, where was I getting in my own way in this journey? Exactly. Go birds. Any suggestions for how to find that less than virtuous self when exploring childhood memories? Yeah, virtuous doesn't necessarily mean innocence. You can be innocent, and that is a thing that happens. And I think as you grow, you're going to want to make sure your character has, again, it's about the environment and making sure that the environment is rich and authentic and descriptive and reacting back to you. And I think if you can create that fabric around that character, that is also potentially going to get you closer to sort of getting away from, quote unquote, the virtuous self. That was what I actually struggled with the most, I think, is in my journey. In my story, I definitely have a lot of things that I felt like kind of happened to me, right? And there's a lot of times where you don't really have choices about what happens to you. They just happen to you. But it's the choices we make out of those choices that are always more interesting than any moment that a character sort of sits and dwells in misery, right? So the consequences of your reaction to challenge is actually a far more interesting conversation than a reader going, yep, you're right, that was difficult, you know? Does anybody have a question about this? Because I know it's also maybe easier to think of it in terms of like an ego exploration.
Well, I think you touched on this about like I think that the amount of like success you have to have in your memoir, like you were saying, maybe the mental health journey it really kind of sucked and it wasn't this like huge, I became like an astrophysicist despite being homeless, you know, because sometimes people can make you feel that way when you're writing your memoir, but that a change can be something like redefining your own perception of what success means outside of what the world's messages are giving you when you
Yeah.
face adversity.
I like that.
So,
Yeah. I think I have one more exercise. Yep.
oh, sorry. Did I just go off?
No.
I thought you were, oh, okay.
No, you were great. That was great. That was exactly what I was wondering. I was just going to say, I think we have one more exercise that I wanted to kind of move us along to. And this is probably going to take, we have 2 minutes maybe, but grab a piece of paper, take 5 minutes and write down as many positive attributes as you can about your main character. And then I guess we only have a couple minutes, so let's also try to put as many attributes that are challenging. And I think this is where you can help to get away from the virtuous self, is by examining these ratios, right? Like, my goal is to kind of have you think, yeah, so how do you not then make yourself a hero again if not showing how you dealt with the problem? To be clear, I'm not saying that you can't be a hero. What I'm saying is you can't be a hero every second of your story. Otherwise, it won't resonate with people, because a hero has to transform from something to become a hero. And so you want to make sure that as you're telling the story of becoming, how you dealt with that problem, that you start in a place where it's easier for people to relate to you. Warren, that's a really good question. Is the goal of memoir to explain yourself to the reader or share an accurate account of your story? I think it could be different depending on the project. In terms of like, is the goal, the ultimate goal overall to explain yourself? Ideally, you're thinking in the same terms as fiction, where you want to be able to relate concepts and create an entertaining and engaging story that people are able to learn something from, draw inspiration from, learn that you never want to do something like that. So I think what I want to set up is the expectation for all of you that you still need to build yourself as a character in the way that you would have to do in any other piece of writing, and to just be very conscious of that as you go, as you tell your story. That's also my cat in the background making noise. Sorry. So we're writing down as many positive attributes as we can about our main character, and also challenging attributes. And I think what I'm looking to have folks understand is that it's a constant balancing act as you write yourself as a character, or as you write what happened to you, right? You're constantly trying to figure out the balance between challenge, adversity, maybe slipping up, maybe being less than perfect. Because as you're saying, like, we do have to figure out how to bring the reader on some sort of journey, even if it's not necessarily a straight line. So does anybody want to talk about some of their negative attributes? We can start with those first.
I can.
Oh, Warren, go ahead.
I had to cut myself off at 4. I'm inflexible, dramatic, self-centered, and naive. Those are things, if I'm thinking of charting a course and like plotting change intention with a story, those feel like they resonate the most, not just with myself, but with other people too.
And I think setting those expectations or using those in framing out your character is going to get you closer to authenticity, because it's going to be hard for people to want to stick with a perfect character, right? And the goal is to bring us from, as Abby says, point A to point B to point C and D. Erica, what do you have?
Well, minute.
It's in the chat. Okay, great. Anyone else really quickly? I like talking about the negative ones because I think those are always the hardest ones to come up with for yourself. All right, cool. How about some positive ones? Nobody has any positive ones? Erica B.
It's hard, but resilience, yeah.
Oh yeah, these are all good. Amy says, I'm blunt, both positive and negative. Abby, negative, huge ego, drunk, self-centered, bad employee, didn't work very hard. Yeah, these are great. Mostly my tips are to you, that I really want you to consider writing balanced characters, even as you're in telling your story, your lead character, your main character still matters. If it's not an authentic character, if you're not experiencing challenges along with successes or negatives along with positives, readers are going to pick up on it. So this is really what I want you to think about, in terms of how you create an authentic character and a good story, right? Like that's really what I want you to be able to do. So my tips and tricks in order to do that include, oh my gosh, what happened to my I think beta readers are actually quite important. And I don't know how many folks have ever worked with a beta reader before. Anyone? Awesome. Really what I'm looking to have you do is put together, sorry, I'm going to try to get, I lost my screen. All right, hold on one second. Exit full screen. There we go. Plan for rewrites. That's the other thing that I think is critical to know. You're definitely going to want to make sure that you give yourself enough time because as Erica A was saying, you do have to figure out like, do you have the moments that you want to have? Do you have the stories that you want to have? And then to really get to the meat of that character map and using those moments of changes as opportunities to help frame out your character story. And I know, Julian, we're kind of at the end, so I wanted to see maybe if there was a minute or two, if anyone wanted to stay to ask a question, like, what is a beta reader? So a beta reader is actually, it can be anyone you trust, or if you want to find a human who you don't know, there are lots of folks who do beta reading. But essentially, it's someone who can read objectively your story for you and tell you how it's coming across and say, I liked this, I didn't like this. Someone who can provide feedback for you. Oh, the last one was create a character map, which is what we talked about in the beginning, plotting those moments of change that you go through. Yeah. Are there other questions? Yeah, a writers group can definitely help. I think it's also important to find people that you trust and not people who are just going to be like, oh my gosh, whatever you write is amazing, right? You want to make sure that you have critical thinkers who are able to provide you with feedback. And I even recommend people who are not necessarily writers because they're going to represent the audience that is most likely going to be in a bookstore and pick up your book and look at it and say, what is this? Is it worth reading? And so you want to be able to have people who aren't necessarily primed to give you the responses that you want. Thanks, Ellie. You can, Susan, it can be actually a diagram, but it can be as simple as writing down the list of those moments of change. Like Abby explained, my father passed away. I became an alcoholic. I decided to get treatment. I froze my eggs, right? It can literally just be a list if you need to start that way. And I do think you probably could find a character arc map. Julian, I don't know if there's like a survey that goes out to folks afterwards, but I'm happy to send along a couple examples of how that could look. Awesome. And my book is coming out on Julian's birthday. It's on Amazon, although Amazon is being really weird right now. Powell's Books, Barnes and Noble, and I really appreciate everybody's feedback. It was so nice to talk to y'all. Yeah.
Cool. Should we wrap up here? Is that okay?
Yeah, I
Can
think
I
that's
just
great.
ask, will there be more of these? Or is this just a one-off today?
We run free workshops almost every Thursday with Blue Stoop. So I'm about to share some links in the chat. I'll say a little bit more about that in a second.
Okay.
So first off, just thank you all so much for being here, Erica, Vanstone, and all the other Ericas. I really appreciated all of your wisdom and generosity with your time and energy. Of those links I've just shared in the chat, you can check them out. That first one is a feedback link. It's this quick survey, allows us to collect some information that we can use to apply for grants to fund free programs like this one. And it also allows you an opportunity to tell Erica what a great job she did. There's a link to fall classes, which I mentioned earlier. We've got everything ranging from a 2-hour session with the one and only N.K. Jemisin, big get this semester, and 9-week classes with some of our best teachers on, you could learn to write a novel in a month. You can dig into, oh, I see that the feedback link is requiring a sign-on. I will fix that and I will email you a better link. There's also 9-week classes on writing a novel or deep revision, and a lot of classes in between on a broad range of topics. We've got financial aid, scholarships, payment plans. We want to make this financially accessible to you. For more upcoming events like this one, we've got these free workshops every Thursday, drop-in writing group every Wednesday. Check out that events link, and to stay on top of all of it, subscribe to our newsletter. It's really the best way to get a little roundup to your inbox every Tuesday. And last but not least, if you want to support what we're doing here, pitch in, bluestoop.org/donate. Any amount makes a difference. That is enough of me rambling. I will post this recording on YouTube and I will email you with a functional feedback survey link. Thank you again, everyone. I'm going to hit that pause on that recording and wrap up.